All right, we are live. Hey, Sara Roversi, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm so glad to be back with you for our collab focus on AI and food.
Yeah, this is a fun topic this week. You and I both know our good friend Mike Lee, who I call my favorite food futurist, also a friend. And I've just been really enjoying over the past year as he's unveiled his opus in a way, Mies, exploring all these different future food scenarios. And I know that a lot of people who run companies or just in their personal lives are sitting back and thinking about how AI is going to change their lives, their work, because we're witnessing how already it's changing so many industries.
Absolutely, yes. And you know also how I'm like taking the mic from you and expanding this perspective because you know that I'm very focused about ethic and the impact on the broader audience and the major challenges the world is facing. So I'm very curious to explore more, to understand not only how AI is going to affect my life, but how AI is going to affect millions of people's life and also maybe tackling the largest issues that we couldn't solve until now. I'm thinking about food security, access to food, and all the other things. So I think that is going to be very interesting because Mike has been always very much, say, pushing forward and going, say, far away, let us thinking and pushing on critical perspectives.
Yeah, he uses a real rigor and a framework to analyze the future and all the different dimensions, like some of the ones you just talked about. So let's bring Mike on stage right now. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Doing well.
Welcome, welcome.
We're spanning a few different cities and time zones. Mike, you're coming from Detroit. Sarah's in Italy. I'm here on the West Coast, Seattle. And if people want to kind of chat and drop in the chat where they're coming from, let's hear it. But Mike, what are we going to hear about today?
So today we've got a special treat for everybody. We've got 3 miniature scenarios about the future. They're set in the year 2040, and they all kind of take different angles of exploring what the collision of food and AI could do all across the supply chain, from farm to fork and everything in between. So I'm excited to kind of share 3 of these stories. One of the stories is actually a preview of my upcoming sequel book to Mies Edition 2, which is all about restaurants. So excited to share that with everybody here for the first time ever.
Awesome. Sneak preview. First time ever. Right. Let's bring it on. And Mike, take it away.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks everybody. Hey, so I'm Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist and author. Last year I wrote a book called Mies. Mies is sort of set up like a magazine, and the whole idea with Mies is imagine that you went into the future, you got to a newsstand and you bought a magazine off of it, and you came back in time into the present. And that's really what Mies is. Mies is a book that explores 4 visions of the future, both optimistic and pessimistic. And it really just kind of explores the tensions that we see today. So while Mies is a work of fiction, it's all rooted in truth. It's all rooted in things that are actually happening today. And this book is really designed for people, first and foremost, in the food industry to sort of imagine what today's set of circumstances could potentially grow into the future. It's so hard sometimes to just kind of look deep into the future because we're so focused on the present. And so Mies is sort of that chance for you to imagine, like, okay, if we don't change anything today, what might happen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And hopefully by seeing those visions of the future, they can kind of shake people into saying, oh, that's really dystopian. I want to get away from that. And then you can do something about it. Or you can say, hey, that's really utopian. Let's go towards that faster. And so, you know, one anecdote that I always like to share about how the vision for Mies came from is a story of a guy named Martin Cooper. He was the head of R&D at Motorola in the 1970s. And his team was credited with creating the first model of the cell phone, which obviously I don't have to say how big that invention was. But the most remarkable thing that I took away from this is that in many interviews, he's gone on record saying that one of the biggest inspirations for him and his team to create the cell phone was Star Trek. And you'll notice that that little Star Trek communicator looks a lot like one of the early Star Trek StarTAC phones. And to me, this is really the metaphor that I want to explore today, is that can we use things that feel like science fiction and have them inspire the makers and doers and innovators today to maybe see things differently and see new opportunities they couldn't have seen before. So keep that kind of idea and that mindset in your mind as I kind of read through the stories of, you are all the Martin Coopers at Motorola Labs in 1970. And I'm going to tell you some Star Trek-like stories, and hopefully that'll enable you to create the next cell phone or whatever the thing is that we have to. So, all right, so let's get on with the show. Basic structure. I've got 3 stories here to tell you. I think what we're going to do is I'm going to read the scenarios. They're pretty brief, and then we'll have some discussion for each of them, okay? So, Mike and Sarah kind of keep me honest on time, but that's the way the flow is going to go, and I really look forward to kind of all the Q&A and discussion afterwards. So scenario 1 is called The Village. So The Village tells how an AI app called Rafiki, which means friend in Swahili, how Rafiki can help Tanzanian farmers diagnose plant diseases, improve soil health by blending traditional wisdom with modern science, and basically take kind of an area that has developing, farming and things like that, and unleash the power of AI and stuff like that to help them grow food better and increase food security. So story goes like this. In 2040, the quiet revolution in global food security is not happening in gleaming agricultural tech centers, but it's happening in the hands of farmers like Amara in rural Tanzania. Using a 6-year-old smartphone with a cracked screen, she points her camera at a cassava plant showing unusual leaf patterns. The AI Village Development Companion app, locally nicknamed Rafiki, immediately identifies an emerging viral infection and recommends a natural treatment using compounds from native plants growing nearby. This same smartphone, which costs less than 2 days' wages, has become Amara's most valuable farming tool. The Rafiki AI companion doesn't just diagnose problems, it has fundamentally transformed how local farmers manage their land. When Amara first inherited her 3-acre plot, the soil was depleted from years of conventional farming. Rafiki analyzed soil samples through the phone's camera and spectrometer and designed a 5-year rehabilitation plan using only locally available resources. The AI's power comes from its contextual understanding, because unlike previous agricultural assistance programs, Rafiki incorporates generations of local farming wisdom combined with cutting-edge agricultural science. It speaks Swahili and understands regional farming practices, recommending intercropping methods that align with cultural traditions while maximizing yield and soil health and resilience. For Amara, this meant intercropping nitrogen-fixing legumes with her cassava, along with specific companion plants that naturally deter the region's common pests. Community knowledge sharing with Rafiki has been absolutely transformed. So when Abraham, who lives in a neighboring village, discovers a particularly effective companion planting arrangement, his Rafiki shares the innovation with the entire network. The AI tested the technique against various local conditions before recommending variations to other farmers. This organic knowledge ecosystem creates a resilient agricultural system tailored to hyperlocal conditions. And perhaps the most revolutionary is how the AI has enabled small farmers to coordinate labor sharing and micro equipment pooling. Without access to tractors or industrial equipment, the AI optimizes the timing and allocation of the community's most precious resource, human labor. Planting and harvest schedules are coordinated across dozens of farms to allow families to help each other at critical times. When emergency strikes, the global food security grid, which is a networked grid across the world of food security support, that exists as a secondary layer of protection. So, for example, when a severe drought hit Eastern Africa in the year 2038, the grid detected emerging food shortages through its network of sensors and predictive models. And rather than simply shipping emergency food aid, the system activated targeted support. Seeds for drought-resistant crop varieties were distributed alongside temporary nutritional supplements. Village development companions helped farmers quickly adapt planting strategies to the changing conditions, which minimizes dependency while maintaining dignity. The grid's philosophy emphasizes building local resilience rather than creating dependency. Each community maintains control over their agricultural decisions, with the grid serving as a safety net for extreme circumstances. When communities do need to draw on grid resources, they participate in determining how assistance is structured. The system isn't perfect. In regions with limited cellular connectivity, physical AI hubs in village centers fill the gap, but access remains uneven. Questions of data sovereignty continue to evolve. Who ultimately owns the agricultural data being generated, and who controls the algorithms? But the 2040 model has proven far more effective than previous top-down approaches, creating a new paradigm where technology amplifies rather than replaces local knowledge and control.
Great
So
job.
that
Awesome.
is scenario one. Shall we? Thoughts, discussion? Any reactions from you guys?
I love this idea of democratized access in different places around the world, giving the power. One question I have is like, what are the potential drawbacks? And is there potential for like the big platform players to kind of work with like bigger players like John Deere and give them more power versus small farmers, right? Like I was like concentration of power with AI is really interesting to me. What do you see happening there, Mike?
I think both things can be true at the same time. Certainly, we're already seeing a concentration of power in the big guys using billions and billions of dollars to train these models. But I think what you're seeing in the recent kind of DeepSeek thing was that it's I think that's a canary in the coal mine for the future, meaning eventually I think the most cutting edge models will be so cheap to run and operate and access that everyone will kind of have more of a level playing field, right? It's already happening, right? I think, you can already download open source free LLMs and run them locally on your own laptop. So it's totally conceivable that somebody in a developing nation with maybe no internet even, if they installed one of the LLMs onto a laptop or a phone, you could run some version of that. So I think, yes, while the concentration is going to continue happening, the floor for access to AI and compute and intelligence, that'll rise as well too. So we just got to make sure that that delta stays somewhat consistent and doesn't get completely out of whack.
That's pretty interesting because
yeah.
let's say,
Go ahead, Sarah.
so just last week, we presented the last report on the scenario on what's going to be the future of food security and what are the shifts that we need to nudge, let's say. And for sure, the technological lens is one of the most important. And for sure, we know that AI, anyway, is going to be one of the big seeds of disruption within the entire process. But it's also critical when I'm thinking about that from the environmental perspective, the massive use of AI and the linkage with the production of energy that we need anyway to combine with the large and massive adoption of AI. So I see positive effects. On the other hand, I'm always reflecting on what are going to be also the other effects that we need anyway to manage. So it's just a reflection on the big scenario.
No, I mean, that's a real big concern, right? And I think the interesting thing about, the potential insight from the DeepSeek thing was that, they did a lot of clever programming on the algorithm to train and use that model. And I think ideally we get to a place where we get better at programming these things so they become more efficient, so you can get more results out of less compute, right? Because if you look at any of the statistics about data center growth projections in the next 10 years, it's absolutely insane, right? And there's a massive amount of electricity and water being consumed by all of these models. So I liken it to the invention of the automobile. Where the first models were probably super inefficient and they get more efficient later. But at the same time, you can't ignore the effect we've had since the invention of the automobile, as the entire world has access to automobiles. I think there's a similar dynamic with AI. It can add a lot of value, sure it can, but we have to mitigate kind of the just gross consumption of resources that it's consuming, as efficient as it might be in the future. Hopefully that, shows opportunities for innovators to tackle, data center efficiency. Like there's a lot of boring back end stuff that I think is a huge ripe opportunity for, sustainability and environmentalism. So, if anything, maybe this rise in AI kind of points a finger at that opportunity for the best and brightest minds out there.
Yeah, and I think your point, Mike, of more efficient code, and I think decentralizing the compute to the edges of the network, and onto our iPhones, and I oftentimes think about how like Bitcoin mining and crypto mining was distributed, and they leveraged the power of all these different computers across the world. You can kind of think of AI in maybe a similar scenario.
Mhm.
But Mike, do you want to jump into your next chapter, and then we could?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
And
keep
for those
moving. Okay.
folks throwing questions down, we will get to them, but we're
Okay.
going to get to all the group questions at the end. So as you think of questions, drop them in the chat. We will get to those. So go ahead, Mike.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. All right, so we were in Tanzania. Now we're going to go to the American Midwest here and show a slightly different context. This story is called Jane's Farm. It shows how a failing Midwest farm was revitalized by an open source AI that manages soil sampling, microbots, and precision drones to implement regenerative agriculture. So this is sort of an interesting story because it kind of combines something that is arguably on the lower tech side, regenerative agriculture practices, but explores how technology can actually enable farmers, small ones especially, to become more regenerative in their practices by managing complexity, getting data, etc. So this is Jane's Farm. Jane Alvarez surveys her 75-acre farm in the American Midwest with a quiet pride that would have seemed impossible 15 years ago. Because back then, her family farm was on the brink of collapse, squeezed between massive industrial operations and mounting debt from the conventional farming methods her parents had embraced. Today, she runs the farm with just 2 part-time employees, yet produces yields that match farms 10 times her size, while regenerating the land once thought was irreparably damaged. Each morning begins the same way. Jane reviews recommendations from her farm's AI system, nicknamed Solomon, which sits on her kitchen tablet. Today, her swarm of autonomous soil sampling microbots have detected declining mycorrhizal fungi in the northern field, a critical component of the soil web that facilitates nutrient exchange with their crops. Solomon recommends deploying the small restoration drones to deliver a targeted biological inoculant and is formulated specifically for her soil conditions. The inoculant contains a precise blend of fungi species that thrive in her soil's unique pH and mineral composition. This transformation began when open source farm AIs became accessible to small farmers in the late 2020s. Following a landmark antitrust case that broke up agricultural data monopolies, prior to that, only massive industrial farms could afford the proprietary AI systems that optimize growing conditions. The democratization of these technologies allowed Jane to implement regenerative practices with unprecedented precision, turning the conventional wisdom about economies of scale on its head. Now, the crisis point came in 2031 when an agri-tech giant, the multinational that dominated the region, attempted to buy out struggling small farms, including Jane's. Facing foreclosure, Jane joined a cooperative of family farmers pooling resources to deploy the new open source farm management AIs. The learning curve was steep, and the first 2 seasons were touch and go as the systems calibrated to her specific land conditions. Jane's autonomous harvesters now work 24/7 during harvest season, using gentle collection methods that preserve soil structure. The machines operate on biofuels produced from farm waste through a microbial digestion process designed by Solomon, creating a closed-loop energy system. And unlike the massive combines used by industrial operations, Jane's smaller machines move with precision between her polyculture plantings, harvesting multiple crop types without compacting the soil. The most revolutionary change has been in soil management. Jane's farm has suffered from decades of conventional agriculture before she inherited. Topsoil depleted of organic matter, beneficial microbes decimated by synthetic fertilizers, compaction from heavy machinery. The soil restoration system she now employs combines AI-designed microbial communities with targeted mineral amendments, rehabilitating soil at a pace previously thought impossible. Solomon analyzes thousands of soil samples daily, adjusting the microbial formulations in real time to address specific deficiencies. The results speak for themselves. Soil carbon has increased 4% in just 5 years, sequestering substantial atmospheric carbon while increasing water retention. During the severe drought of 2037 that devastated conventional farms in her county, Jane's water retentive soil allowed her crops to thrive with minimal irrigation. The nutritional density of Jane's crops now exceeds USDA organic standards by 35%. Solomon continuously refines growing practices to optimize both yield and nutrient profiles, discovering synergistic plant relationships that industrial monoculture operations just can't utilize. The AI verifies all results through automated testing, allowing Jane to secure premium prices from nutrition-conscious buyers. The turning point for cooperation came when an agritech giant sued Jane and other farmers, claiming intellectual property infringement on certain growing techniques. The case dragged on for months, draining resources, but the cooperative's distributed databases of farming practices, meticulously documented by their AIs, demonstrated prior art and indigenous origins for many of the techniques in question. The landmark ruling not only dismissed the case, but established legal precedent protecting traditional agriculture knowledge from corporate patents. Small farmers like Jane have now regional data cooperatives to share insights securely, creating a counterweight to corporate agriculture while maintaining individual control. These co-ops have begun to reshape rural communities, allowing family farms to thrive while practicing agriculture that heals rather than depletes the land. As Jane watches a flock of migratory birds land in her northern field, a sight unseen in the county for decades, she reflects on how technology, properly directed, has allowed her to farm in greater harmony with natural systems while producing more abundance than ever before.
What I like about this, Mike, is it's hopeful because so much of the AI scenario building is like kind of dark and science fiction-y. And while you're talking about a lot of really cutting edge technology, it seems like the technology is the linchpin for maybe a future that saves farming in a way.
Yeah, I frequently think to myself that I think the most idealistic version of AI is that we can use AI to remove kind of the inhuman tasks that we have to do in order to become more human or have more harmony, right? And it's sort of counterintuitive, right? And that's why I think this scenario is interesting, because it does collide something that's cutting edge and high tech with something like regenerative agriculture, which is millennia old, right? And frequently a lot of times people get caught in the trap of thinking it's either one or the other, right? I tend to try to think about scenarios in the future where we take a little bit of both, right? So that's kind of what this scenario is about.
It's pretty interesting because what every marginal area is facing, it's the population and of course all the farmers that cannot farm anymore. I'm thinking about the Lands Up Mediterranean diet, where we call heroic farming because it's so tough to farm from olive trees that are very big, steep, even if we know that these kind of ingredients are like elixir for longevity.
Yeah.
And so, of course, thinking about solutions that can allow to take care of this kind of environments, not only intensive farming, but also starting caring about marginal areas that needs to be, of course, cared, but also, I don't want to say exploited, but they are holding lots of value. And so I
Yeah.
think that technology can help a lot. On the other hand, connection, it's absolutely fundamental. So thinking about a world without Starlink that can allow also marginal areas to be
Yeah.
connected is something that we need to face anyway.
It's wild to think about that. And I mean, you had an early question too about like, what if the connection goes down, right? About putting all your eggs in one
Exactly.
basket. Ideally, hopefully these using these tools can kind of teach people. I mean, when I first learned how to cook, I followed recipes by the, very religiously, right? But then you do it over and over again and you start to get a feel, and then I was not needing the recipes anymore. You're just kind of running on your own. Hopefully this can happen here in some respect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about collectives and community powered movements and decision making, and it seems like that's going to be really important for people and farmers like Jane in the future to kind of work with others to collectively push their agendas and stay true to their mission.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think AI is different from maybe previous groundbreaking technologies is that, I don't know, for the past 20 years, a lot of people have been kind of saying to kids and things like that, you got to learn how to code. You got to learn how to code. And to the certain extent, that was pretty true. And I think it maybe still is true, because they were basically saying that there's this whole new bunch of technologies on the internet. And if you can't learn how to code, you don't really have access to manipulate those things. You can't make apps. You can't do anything like that. And then basically that kind of implied that if you don't know how to code, you're kind of beholden to the people who can code, right? And so that was kind of this tension. And that's why people wanted to teach kids how to code. Now, this is interesting because AI is completely conversational. There's no coding language required to use it. It's the language you speak. And so I think about how profound that is, that, you know, some people can say, oh, I'm not a technology person, I don't know how to use all these apps. Well, you know, LLMs and things like that are as simple as just having a conversation. So that really, I think, is a nuance that should not be overlooked, that it immediately gives virtually anyone who can type or speak access to the same technology that, you know, the CEOs of Google have, right? So to me, I think that's really interesting because, you know, yes, farmers, I think, you know, they're not tech averse, but, you know, they're very suspicious about things that have to change their workflow and things like that. Something like Solomon or something like Rafiki is literally just like having another person with you. You know, you can say, hey, what's that fungus? What's up with that? Right? There's no coding, there's no interface. That's all there is too. So I think there's a really big power in the democratization of compute and intelligence, because it is a natural language platform, not some, you know, arcane coding language that everyone needs to learn syntax for.
Some great questions rolling in. We will, again, after this next scenario, we'll start to open up the Q&A. But Mike, you want to move on to chapter 3?
Yep. So little spoiler alert, you said that the previous two were very optimistic. This one's not so much, but sometimes we have to taste a little dystopia to kind of light a fire under our butts. This story is actually a very deeply abbreviated, abridged version of a story from my next book, Mies Edition 2, which is all about the future of restaurants, where I spend the entire book exploring the future of restaurants. So this story is called The Perfect Sandwich. And it depicts how a fictitious fast food chain named Burger Bell, B-E-L-L-E, creates an AI called Flavor IQ. And the unique thing about Flavor IQ is it can not only generate tons of recipes for food, but they've been able by 2040 to model the human taste perception mechanisms. And you're able to, quote unquote, taste food digitally. So you can kind of go from Flavor IQ generating 1,000 chicken recipes to having the algorithm virtually taste them and give feedback on how a human might react to it. And that at least narrows down the scope of how many recipes a human has to physically cook and test with people. So let's talk about where this goes. This is the perfect sandwich. In early 2030, fast food giant Burger Bell created Flavor IQ, a revolutionary AI system that would forever change the food industry. While AI recipe generators were not new, Flavor IQ was different. It consisted of two groundbreaking components, Recipe Writer and Taste Twin. Flavor IQ worked like two AI systems in one. First, Recipe Writer generated recipes by combining knowledge from different cooking styles. Think of it as having the world's best chefs all working together on one dish. But the real breakthrough was its partner, Taste Twin. It was an AI that could taste food without actually cooking anything. Burger Bell built this by analyzing billions of TikTok food videos they acquired in 2026. By studying people's reactions to food, their expressions, comments, and even tiny physical responses, the AI inferred exactly how humans experience flavors. It essentially became a digital twin of the human sense of taste. Now, using these tools, Flavor IQ tested millions of chicken sandwich recipes instantly. For something as simple as the brine that the chicken would be in, it tried countless combinations of ingredients and brine times. Then it did the same for every single other part of the sandwich. Where human chefs might taste a few dozen recipes in a month, Flavor IQ could, quote unquote, taste millions in seconds, understanding which flavors would appeal to most people. It even knew how different regions preferred their food and how emotions affected taste, like why your mom's cooking always tastes better to you. After 11 months of processing, Flavor IQ created the perfect sandwich, a fried chicken sandwich that reached a bliss point no one thought was possible. When Burger King soft launched it in test markets, the perfect sandwich became a worldwide trending topic within 24 hours. Lines formed before dawn as people clamored to taste it. The company spent 9 months building the supply chain for the nationwide launch. placing massive orders with chicken processors and even stockpiling frozen chicken as reserves. The price of chicken rose considerably simply due to Burger Bell's purchasing volume. Farmers expanded their chicken operations, processors added third shifts, and employees received retention bonuses while new hires got signing bonuses. On August 29th, 2033, the Perfect Sandwich launched nationwide. People lined up at Burger Bell locations as early as 4 a.m. with camping chairs. Customers quickly filled the dining rooms, many streaming their first bites live. Some finished their sandwiches only to immediately rejoin the line to get a second sandwich. The sandwich's unprecedented popularity transformed the food industry and agricultural systems. Competing chains rushed to create their own versions, dramatically increasing the demand for chicken nationwide. Small and mid-sized poultry farms expanded rapidly, often taking on substantial debt to meet the demand. But by 2036, disaster struck. Concentrated production and corner cutting on biosecurity led to the fourth and most devastating avian flu outbreak in a decade. The industry was forced to cull 1.8 billion chickens. That's 80%, 87% of North America's chicken population, all at a cost of about $10 billion. This mass depopulation of chicken took 32 days as farmers sealed off barns and gassed their flocks with carbon dioxide or nitrogen. Some simply cut the ventilation to their barns, letting birds die of asphyxiation and heat exhaustion. Though the government covered 75% of direct losses, many small farmers still could not survive. The industry that had expanded to satisfy humanity's AI-perfected cravings ultimately collapsed under its own weight, further consolidating an already top-heavy industry as smaller operations went bankrupt or were acquired by the giants that could weather the storm. What began as a technological marvel, the ability to digitally taste food without cooking it, had reshaped and ultimately undermined an entire agricultural sector, all in the pursuit of the perfect bite.
You're right. Get dark on that one. more Black Mirror.
I don't like it.
I really like you considering the downstream ramifications of like some of these technology innovations that we hail as groundbreaking, but you have to look at the bigger picture and the implications. And I don't even know if we need like this so super sophisticated AI, just algorithm driven preferences and creation of things. Oftentimes I think can lead to this, but this is really, really concentrated.
Yeah, in a sense, this story is, it's very science fiction-y, but it's essentially a story that's already happened, right? Because I think, big food has been already worked on for decades to create foods like this. They didn't have AIs to do it, but they had a lot of research and a lot of time to approach this bliss point, right? And those products became so incredibly popular that, if you're at a big snack company and one of these products is kind of bolstering your bottom line, you can't really afford to deviate from that product, right? Because people want it. They're hooked on it. And so this is sort of an allegory of taking that pattern of what already happened in big food and just exponentially increasing the consequences to see this. So that's kind of the moral, the allegory of this story is, just because we could create the perfect food that every single person on the planet is going to love, should we? And there's no clean answer to that.
Of course, but we need to reflect a lot on
Yeah.
what we can change also in our eating habits and so on, because anyway, our eating habits are the big driver. And so I think that this is something that we need to spark as a reflection and share as much as we can.
Yeah, I purposely picked a chicken sandwich because I remember there was a couple years here in America where all the fast food chains were competing on their fried chicken sandwiches, and there was like lines and there was fights at Popeye's Chicken on the day that they released their chicken sandwich, and it just seemed like very dystopian to me. So I just felt like this chicken sandwich is like a great avatar for just like human desire. But the other thing you can think about too is like if you had a fictitious thing called Flavor IQ, you could probably also create the most delicious salad ever created. You can create the most delicious smoothie, right? Like, so it can be used however you want to use it.
Yeah, and what are the ethics of the algorithmic or AI driven manipulation of consumer flavors and just getting them so addicted? I mean, there's lots of talk about how McDonald's engineers their food to create an addictive
Yeah.
fast food, and like this just like taking that even further down that road with AI.
Yeah, and I think one key point about this is the fact that, Burger Bell was the one that introduced this thing, but what happens in restaurants in the food industry is once one person gets a successful product, everyone else wants to copy it, right? So it's not just the problem of Burger Bell being this massive fast food chain doing all the things that they're doing. It's all of the other restaurants from other fast food chains to even fine dining trying to, jump onto this bandwagon of everybody wants chicken sandwiches, right? So it creates a ripple effect of demand that goes well beyond what one food brand might be doing with their products.
Well,
And when I see this kind of scenario, I reflect on what's our role from the educational starting point, because to stimulate the desire of something, we need to create a cultural framework that can nudge this kind of stimulus. So there's a lot that we can still do in schools at early ages to avoid this kind of scenario and give to kids different kind of perspectives of what is good, what is delicious, and develop more the taste and the flavors spectrum that is pretty broad, and we haven't explored it enough until now, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
well, let's open up the questions, and I'm going back a little bit, and we may be spanning a few of these different scenarios, Mike, because you kind of had the three different ones. But let's start with Ivan. I apologize, Ivan, if I mispronounced your name. This was regarding, I think, the first one, in terms of that the usage of the technology in the village and how people might gather data collection. So he basically asked, can you share more detail regarding data collection? We require a lot of data to be efficient and train the data on the soil particularities.
Yeah. So I think one of the necessary conditions for this scenario to exist is that we've gotten to a point where we've miniaturized and made cheap the ability to collect a whole swath of data from the soil, from the plants and stuff like that. Certainly computer vision helps quite a bit, but you can only go so far with computer vision. We kind of need a whole full stack of sensors on a farm to kind of be able to manage the data input, right? That's such an important thing. And there's evidence to show that those technologies are already in progress, right? Are they to the point where you can cheaply ship them across the world to almost anywhere? Probably not. But again, this is kind of just jumping to a couple, a decade and a half from now to say, what can happen if these kinds of sensors, the price to performance ratio increases at a precipitous rate, right? That unlocks a whole new aspect of what you can do for these things. So, a lot of these scenarios are written to highlight the fundamental technologies that go into creating a solution like this, right? So, if I was a company and you were very excited about this Rafiki app, one of the action plans you take away from this is we need to figure out how to make capturing this data more efficient, right? So scenarios like this kind of guide your next step efforts, right? Because if you love this story and you want to get there, what do you do now, right? You can't just create this overnight. And so that's kind of why these stories are useful, is to show you where pressure needs to be applied in order to make this story come true. Because there's no guarantee this story will ever be true unless we make it true.
Here's a question from Ashlyn Kamudi. She's wondering what the best channels or pathways are to share and socialize this foresight that you're building, Mike. Where can the narrative show up to drive significant behavior change? So I guess, as Sara mentioned. So have you given thought to that? How we can maybe use this type of foresight to maybe distribute it and like achieve better future results?
Well, that's a good layup for a shameless plug I have about the book.
Buy the book.
I mean, that's why I wrote this book, right? That's why I wrote this book, because before I wrote this book, I was doing this kind of work behind the scenes. And, Sara, you've done a lot of this stuff too. I was doing a lot of this work behind the scenes with companies, like trying to have like 10-year, like future, scenario plans for them and engineer, using foresight to help them plan for the future. And it was great because the clients were super happy about it. It was super useful to them. But, by definition, that's a confidential document that I could never share with anybody, right? And so I still do that work with companies. But Mies is sort of a public version of that to kind of spread the gospel of like what foresight can do for food organizations, and how you can leverage this kind of science fiction stuff to capture the imaginations of leadership and show different futures and different potentials. Again, comes back to that Martin Cooper at Motorola dynamic. Like, I just see so many Martin Coopers at food companies today that just need to be shown Star Trek to say, let's think about this problem differently, right? So, with Mies, second edition coming out soon. And then also too, like, it's spawned a separate consulting practice where I can essentially work with companies, and I've already started working with big companies like Givaudan and Compass on this to say, okay, Mies is about all these other topics out there in the world. I can custom create a Mies-like thing, whether it's a chapter or a full book, that takes all of the issues that your company is concerned about and builds a future for you. So that's kind of how I'm spreading, this use case of foresight, to kind of, not just tell fun stories, but to actually use these stories to precipitate change and new innovations in the food industry.
I think that that this is great for leaders. I also think a lot about media literacy and like how AI is going to require more media literacy. I feel like we're going to just need better overall AI literacy among people as we bring them up. So instilling it into the curriculum of young people, right, and making sure that they can interpret what how these tools might be used, and kind of so they can see through misinformation, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, like, look, every executive at a food company is inundated with white papers and decks. I wanted to create Mies in this way because it penetrates that layer of content like fog, right? This thing looks like a high-end magazine for a reason. I wanted to tell stories on a level that, the show Black Mirror does, because I think it just kind of sets this aside from like, oh boy, I got another PowerPoint deck about the food to read. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with those decks, but I just feel like part of precipitating action within companies is you almost have to show people how something could look in a very literal sense, to get them to act, whether that's acting in a positive or negative way.
Sandy has a great question. She's basically, I think, asking, she says, what is Jane's background? She inherited this farm, but does she also have an educational background in adjacent fields and biosciences and tech? I wonder what the new farmer would need to have as an understanding of the scenario. So you talked about how like you're coding, and we're seeing people creating full programs just with AI, and they don't necessarily have that. Is this kind of similar in the future? You don't necessarily need to have all this background, or do you?
Having the background certainly helps. I think part of the feature of Jane is that she's largely self-taught behind this, right? There's a lot of automation, there's a lot of mechanization, there's a lot of guidance she has here. Look, I mean, I'm not a coder, but I've been using AI to code programs to accomplish a whole plethora of tasks that I do, and it's fairly simple for me with a very menial coding experience to be able to do stuff I never knew how to run a Python script and write one. Now I don't know how to do it innately, but I can do it through here. I think the same analogy maybe holds for Jane and her farm. Maybe she doesn't know how to do carbon sequestration in her soil, but that's sort of the point, right? Is that the tools are kind of helping her. And not only that, the mechanization is enabling her to do other work. So in a sense, like she's kind of be able to manage this farm from her couch, right? If she wanted to. And so I think, again, that's just a flattening of the access to technology and knowledge that AI can
Ivan brings up, I think a lot of times I hear this concern around AI, like as we increasingly use this technology, do we ultimately start to lose? And I've heard this about chefs, right? As we have AI create recipes and create the next culinary masterpiece and automation to cook it, do we lose that sense of touch with actually be creating culinary masterpieces? Is it the same with the farmer? Could some of the farmer knowledge be lost?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question, right? I think that, in the culinary sense and largely maybe in the farm sense, the physical touch and getting to know like how soil feels or how food feels. Yeah, I do think there's a threat to maybe lose that as we kind of outsource that to machines and things like that. In terms of raw knowledge, though, I don't think it's necessarily true that you have to lose all farmer human knowledge by using AI. Remember, AI learned from humans, right? ChatGPT can write because they fed a big portion of the internet of human written language into it, right? So in a sense, it tries to mimic human language. I think the same can be true for inputting, all of the human found farmer knowledge into an AI. In theory, that should spit out the human knowledge, but of course, it can kind of also learn from itself, right? So yeah, there's obviously degrees of extremes that you want to try to avoid, but in the most optimistic sense, I think, I kind of see farmer AIs as a really close to perfect representation of what a human farmer might say, just kind of compacted into, a digital format.
I'm also considering the aspects of safeguarding heritages. And always, I'm coming from this perspective. And we have been debating a lot also within the UNESCO world and thinking about how many heritages related to gastronomy, living heritages related to gastronomy. I'm thinking about French gastronomy, the washoku in Japan, as well as, of course, the Mexican cuisine that is another UNESCO heritage, world heritage, and of course, Mediterranean diet, and many more that are now, of course, under threat because of the evolution, the fast pace of the evolution, and young generations sometimes not caring about that. And how important are traditional diets also related to farming and health, agriculture and health, and the deep connection between these two very important dots. And I think that AI can help a lot now, can help us a lot to preserve traditional dialect, traditional heritage,
Yeah.
traditional recipe, and so on. Probably this is the time we have now, while we still have these heritages in our mind, in our, say, living communities. So it's pretty interesting what you're saying, because probably now it's the time to make sure that those heritages are going to be captured.
Yeah, and maybe unlocking new things about the past that we didn't know. I mean, I read a story that there's some researchers using AI to decode the Dead Sea Scrolls, like things that we just couldn't read before and understand. Like maybe we can unlock, maybe we uncover a cave full of ancient pottery that we've never seen before, right? And maybe AI can help
Exactly.
chemically analyze that and say, oh my gosh, no, actually these people ate this thing, So yeah, I think all these things can be true. And that's sort of the daunting thing about AI, is that you can use it to preserve these ancient heritages, to keep them alive for centuries to come. You can also just create a highly addicting chicken sandwich out of it. So all of these things can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just matters
Yeah.
like how you want to direct the technology.
It's so interesting to me.
100%.
It was a dichotomy, right? You had this world where we're in danger of losing all these crops and these going to monoculture, and you also hear like a lot of younger generations say, hey, we need to get back to older practices in farming. But when I look at the Jane scenario, you kind of needed that technology to maybe protect all these different crops and these seeds, and actually get to more regenerative farming practices.
Yeah, it's the paradox of, can technology make us more human, more in touch with nature? That's sort of some cognitive dissonance.
This is from a comment and a question from Irita, and I apologize, Irita, if I get that wrong. He says, to Sarah's point, farming is part of the lifestyle that we crave in the Western world for these people, especially the Mediterranean. Longevity is strongly connected also to that. How do we offer the benefits of the technology but safeguard the former? So it's kind of talking to what we were just talking about, Mike, but how do we offer the benefits of technology while safeguarding things like, longevity and the Mediterranean diversity?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, like in Mies 1, you guys have heard this story, but I have a story about a family called the Burlingtons, who it's an allegory about precision nutrition, meaning it's a future where precision nutrition is so good that it can perfectly recommend every person the individual meal that they need or want or whatever for their health goals. And I explore like the effect of that on a family and the dynamic of eating together, breaking bread together, sharing together at holidays, and how it kind of changes the dynamic of that family atmosphere when everyone's eating in their own silo because they've gotten a recommendation. And the one takeaway I have from that potentially dystopian future is that I think especially when it comes to food, all of these kind of prediction technologies or personalized nutrition technologies, they're going to need some sort of airplane mode button built into them where you can just turn it off. I think that's why I love food, is because it's highly messy and emotional and illogical, but at the same time, there's a lot of logic behind it. And so again, it comes back to that fact of like, just because you can predict the perfect meal for you, should you? Sometimes it's okay to just turn off the app and just eat 2 slices of cheesecake and a Coca-Cola, right? If you want to, right? It's all about balance. So yeah, I think as we get more and more of these technologies in our lives, we need to also make sure to balance that with really good escape hatches to kind of turn them off and create analog spaces still.
We have about 10 minutes left. By the way, I want to give shout outs to all the people dialing in from Paris. We have New York, we have Italy, Seattle. So just lots of great different people dialing in from all over the globe. I'm going to ask a couple more questions that have been put, but if people have some other questions, drop them in. Tim Redfern, I think he's referring back to kind of the soil and how we use AI to kind of make sure that we're taking care of that. But he says, is AI necessary to decide to put something back in the soil rather than deplete it? It's more a short-term philosophy than a lack of knowledge that leads to the use of artificial fertilizers and monoculture, no rotation, etc.
I don't think AI is necessary to, for that. I mean, obviously, there's people been doing this for a long, long time without AI, right? I think the advantage AI maybe provides is that for people who do want to figure out how to be more regenerative with their soil, it maybe lowers the bar of the learning curve for people, right? So yeah, no, I mean, look, we've been growing food mostly more or less just fine for a very long time. I think AI is just going to supercharge kind of the goals at which people reach. And again, that comes back to that duality. Like a regenerative farmer is going to have a lot more tools at his or her disposal to enrich their soil using technology and learning. But then, the big ag companies of the world are also going to have AI in terms of creating the next generation pesticide or the next generation GMO. All of these things can be true at the same time. So it's a balance.
One of the things I always try to do when I'm running a session and having an expert like yourself, Mike, is for people out there who are thinking through how to prepare themselves for the future, whether it's for their company or their own career. Do you have like any practical tips for them, like how to start to AIify and kind of make sure that their company is going to be prepared for the long term, leveraging these technologies? Because at some point, I think they become table stakes for survivability for some of these big brands or even your startup.
So the way I learned how to use AI was similar to how my 4-year-old daughter learns about life, which is when you're young. And I would say that all of us, in terms of AI, are at a toddler level so far because it's so new. When you're really young, you don't really have like lessons and goals and achievements like on a test yet. They just focus on play. They just focus on play to kind of develop these raw skills, and the play kind of keeps them motivated to develop these raw skills. And then that sets them up later for more rigorous kind of education and stuff like that. I would advise that for people who work in food and maybe they want to think about how to use AI for their food work or something like that, don't try to figure out precisely how this is going to have a use case for your food organization immediately yet. I would encourage people to literally find anything they're passionate about and just start using AI and experimenting with it to try to see if you can enrich that. I learned a big part of how to use AI in my obsession with American football. I would like use it to analyze statistics and try to figure out who's going to win this game. I used it to kind of manage my fantasy football league. Does that have anything to do with food? Absolutely not. But I learned so much damn skill from using it on a unrelated use case that I could directly apply to all the things that I'm doing in food, in research, in writing this book. And because I was kind of like in a low stakes environment where I wasn't really so stressed out about what the outcome was. I was really mentally free to explore and experiment and have an open mind about what AI could do, right? And again, those lessons were immediately transferable. But I'm always doing that now. I'm using a lot for work, but I use it a lot for just passion projects and just curiosity, right? So I think that's the best way. There's no secret tip or trick to there's no secret prompt formula. Just keep trying, and then you'll figure it out. I think that's really the best lesson.
I think your Detroit Lions maybe need to start using AI mic to make it to the Super Bowl, but
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast.
Andy Chen asks about, thoughts about AI and promoting biodiversity, mitigating centralized risk. He said he's recently listening to a Gastrod episode about the world's first seed bank.
So with biodiversity, I've spent a lot of time working and thinking about biodiversity too. Part of the reason why, I think AI actually has a really big opportunity to help increase biodiversity. Here's why I think so. Part of why the industrial ag system is so monoculture is because big companies wanted to control the number of variables they had to deal with, right? It's way easier if you're a giant manufacturer of corn to only have one breed of corn and just scale it up to infinity, because it just controls the number of variables you have to deal with, right? Like if you have a pesticide you want to put on a corn, you have one corn to deal with, so you only have to design for that one corn, not 40 varieties, right? So I think a part of why industrialized agriculture is the way it is, and monocultures, is because they wanted to remove a lot of complexity from their food system. Now, obviously, that has downsides, but AI is good at, one of the things that AI is really good at is helping to process complexity into simplicity. So it's conceivable that a large company could plant 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 different kinds of corn, because maybe they're using AI to help bridge the gap between all of those differences in the corn, right? Maybe it's easier now to have a more complex supply chain because you have AI helping to decode that complexity into something that's more simple, right? And so I guess at a macro level, that's kind of how I see a potential use case for AI is biodiversity is good for the planet, right? And it's good for us. It's good for us. It's not good for industrial big business, right? But is there a universe where you could use AI and almost create a dynamic where you could scale biodiversity, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but you could scale biodiversity because you're using tools like this to make the complexity more easy to deal with. I think there's an opportunity.
Let's hope.
There's some good questions real quick. And I'm sorry. If you folks want to drop in their LinkedIn, so I always like to know, people like to build community through these comments. We want to drop that in, we'll make sure to connect with you folks, but also there's 1 or 2 more questions. So if we go a little bit over, Mike, is that okay?
Yeah, I'm free. And also here, I'll put up my email address so anyone can reach out if you have other questions, but yeah, go ahead.
And Sarah, I apologize. You go ahead, Sarah.
Go.
Okay. I like this from Tiff Graham. Any AI scenario, use case scenarios where there are strange combinations of food systems, like vertical farming on miniature level in apartments or restaurants with vertical farming and robots connecting to customer service. So will AI drive different and interesting uses of these technologies in the food system that might surprise us, I guess?
If we make it happen, it will. That's my kind of use for that, right? I think one of the things I love to say is, like, the future of food is not a spectator sport. If anybody loved or hated any elements of these scenarios, the good news is, or the bad news is, that they're fictional. They don't exist yet. And so if you want to see more use cases of using AI to connect vertical farms and things to small restaurants, it's out there for the taking, right? And so I think that's kind of the beauty of this, is that everything out there was created by some other person, no smarter than you or I necessarily. So with AI, you have a bigger stepping stone to create big things that maybe were way harder to do before. So yes, the answer is yes. The use cases are potential. I haven't seen it yet, but that doesn't mean that the answer is not yes.
Well, this has been so much fun, Mike. I really enjoyed hearing all your thoughts. And again, I'm super appreciative of your structured thinking around scenario building and helping us to kind of process through the magic of storytelling. I think storytelling is a really powerful tool to kind of analyze the way in which futures go. I mean, we can all do like slide decks and do charts and stuff, but like sometimes just storytelling is a great way to do this. And I think you do that very well.
Thank you very much.
And Mike, I think you dropped your email up there.
Thank you so much. Also,
people see it there. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, no, I would say we need this kind of perspectives to reflect more and more about what are going to be the implications, because still we have time to change the future that we don't like to see. So I think that this is absolutely an exercise that we need to do more and more overall in big industries and big food industries. So the work you're doing, I think it's absolutely fundamental for all of those working in R&D and making the future through their companies and their impacts.
Well, thank you too for helping to facilitate this and doing all the great work you guys do. We're all fighting the good fight, so it's always great to chat with you.
And by the way, I'm going to give a plug. Mike is starting a podcast. We're helping him on the Spoon Podcast Network. So, Mike, I think you'll be exploring all of these different ideas and going deep on things like restaurants and other parts of the food system in your podcast. So check out that out. Very soon, we have a bunch of episodes in the can. The spoon.tech/podcast. You can subscribe to Mike's already because you have a little teaser up there. But this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so
Thank you.
fun. Look forward to more. Thanks for all the questions, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.